Good afternoon and welcome to the Special Olympics webinar sponsored by Gallagher. Thank you, Gallagher. Thank you for supporting Special Olympics and being part of the official supporters of the Special Olympics sports and coaching program. Today's webinar is all about health and fitness of sports coaching. This webinar will be held in English, but also offers interpretation in Spanish, French, Arabic, Chinese, and Russian. All you have to do is press the interpretation button and select the language. Please use the Q&A button if you have any questions to ask the panel. Before we start this webinar, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Gilmour and I am 21 years old and joined Special Olympics Malta about 7 years ago. Special Olympics has changed my life. This was the beginning of something so unimaginable. I am thankful for all of this. I started training athletics, sprinting and jumping. Sports helped me write out all my frustrations. All this gave me the confidence, gave me the motivation, gave me the power, gave me the will to fight and become better, gave me self-esteem, gave me a better understanding of myself and of life itself. Through sports and training, all this was achieved. As a Special Olympics health messenger, we've been trained to serve as a health and fitness leader, educator, and most important, a role model within the Special Olympics community. To conclude, as a health messenger, my main role is to ensure that every athlete, family member, member of the Special Olympics community, everyone I know, learns the importance and benefits of living a healthy and balanced lifestyle. As part of the Europe Week of Sports, the 25th September celebrates the ICCE Global Coaches Day. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the coaches and acknowledge the amazing work that coaches all around the world do daily with the Special Olympics athletes. Thank you, coaches, for all you do. Our first speaker is Monica Forquer. Monica is a fitness advisor for the Special Olympics and founder of the Active Health LLC. She served as a physical educator, strength and conditioning coach, and group fitness instructor. She also created resources and programs such as Fit5 and performing stations, which are still used today. She also developed and implemented the global fitness strategy for 2016 till 2021. Monica, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here with all of you today. If you move on to the next slide, perfect. I'm going to be talking with you a little bit about our initiative and evaluation project that we've just are completing, which is called Health Through Sport. So if you can move on to the next slide. Today, I'll give you a little bit of an introduction on health promotion through sport and why it's important. And then we'll talk about the evaluation that we are completing. And then we're going to give you some recommendations based on those findings. Next slide, please. So to be a great athlete, you need to be a healthy athlete. And we all know that that's really important. And there are certainly some benefits that happen organically from sports participation. For example, we know that athletes generally are more physically active. They're going to practice all the time. And even, if you participate as a youth participant, you're more likely to be active when you're older, even if you no longer participate in sports. So we know that those things translate very easily. We also know that there are some major health benefits from sports participation. We see that every day in the movement, in Special Olympics, the benefits of inclusion, but we have also seen that in the research that mental health is benefited, especially by sports, team sports. However, some of those benefits are assumed, but they aren't actually organically happening. And so, for example, we know that athletes don't necessarily eat healthier than their peers just because they participate in their sports. We hope that they do, but it's not always translated that way in the research. And in general, this is supported by the literature. Only about 50% of coaches and caregivers and 30% of athletes are considered health literate, meaning they know how to be healthy in different areas of their life. Perhaps this is even lower in the Special Olympics athlete population. We aren't sure. We have not done the digging to try and examine that yet. But we know that that's a really important component of how you're living your life and making your choices. So our athletes, if we want them to eat healthier, we need to be able to teach them those health habits. Next slide, please. And so just wanted to kind of point out some data according to our Healthy Athletes data. Our athletes at Special Olympics are at an increased risk for several chronic conditions, including obesity, high blood pressure, osteoporosis, and falls compared to many other people. And this is really important when we think about, as a coach, why you might want to be promoting health through your sports practices. So we're going to talk a little bit about health promotion through sport. And that is really, those extra steps on how do you integrate those health and fitness messages? How are you integrating maybe some exercises to make sure that our athletes are staying healthy and fit? How are you discussing important topics? And before we talk about kind of how you can do that, first I want to talk about this evaluation project. So at Special Olympics, we've placed a lot of emphasis around health, but what we haven't really had a great understanding of is how that's being done at the grassroots level. How is it being done at sports practice? And so our goal through this evaluation was to really learn from our athletes, caregivers, coaches, and program staff how to better promote health behaviors and improve health outcomes through sports practice. And you can see here that we have a couple of aims with this evaluation project: describe best practices and desired programmatic approaches. How can this be done? How is it being done? Explore the leadership roles. How does a coach play into this and training needs? Understand expected outcomes, understand what we want. What do athletes want as in terms of improvements because of these health promotion efforts? And then finally, we wanted to compile some resource needs from the programming. Go ahead and move to the next slide, please. And so this was done through a survey that we tried to do, pretty broadly, and some focus groups that were a bit smaller. Go ahead and move to the next slide. And so we have finished the survey and the focus groups. We're still analyzing the focus groups to some degree, but we're going to talk about them today. The survey, we had 324 participants from 17 countries. 6 out of the 7 Special Olympics regions were represented, and most of the participants in this study were involved with Special Olympics for over 6 years. In the focus groups, we had 15 total groups that we talked to. And again, these were athletes, coaches, caregivers, and program staff or volunteers, high-level program staff or volunteers. And we also talked to regional staff, people who support all of the Special Olympics regions as part of those focus groups. We had 3 additional interviews to try and talk to all of the groups as much as we needed to. And then in total, we had about 51 participants. And what was really great is we did have all regions represented across those focus groups. At the bottom here, you see the figure of how those participants were broken up. So we had a majority of the participants, or 42%, not a majority, but many of the participants were athletes. And then smaller groups were represented here, but you can see that we did have 27% of the participants were coaches. And that's really how we're going to kind of dive through the evaluation results. I'm going to kind of give you the lens of the coaches, because that is really who's on here and listening, and you want to know what coaches are saying. And then I'll talk about how that compared to other participants. Go ahead and move to the next slide. So as far as the coaches were concerned, we talked on the survey with we heard from, 89 coaches from around the world. 52% of those were from the United States. This is one of the challenges. It was an English survey, and so that was a challenge in trying to disseminate. So just kind of noting that. 83.15% were involved in Special Olympics for 6 or more years, and I believe we even had about 50% that were involved for 10 or more years, which was really exciting. And then the really cool thing here is the coaches that participated in this were training athletes that were from a very wide variety of age groups. Many were youth coaches, but some were coaches of much older athletes as well. So go ahead and let's move to the next slide. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about the attitudes of our coaches. And I wanted to just kind of point out a couple of things. The one thing that we asked all of our participants were kind of these first 4 elements that you see. So our health and fitness, important parts of the sports experience. And you see that everyone agreed that is the case. In the next one, you see, does Special Olympics value health and fitness? Or we asked their agreement on that. And most people said that was true. The next element you see is all athletes should learn about health and fitness. And again, 100% agreement. Some people were just somewhat agreeing, but still everyone agreed with that statement across the board. And again, health and fitness should be a regular component of sports practice, 100% agreement. Where it starts to get a little bit different is where we move to the next component. My athletes know how to be healthy and fit. And you can see that there was still quite a bit of agreement with our coaches that they do believe that their athletes know that, but there were a couple that were either indifferent on that question or that they did disagree in some way. And then you can also see that there's a little bit of less agreement when it comes to their confidence in their ability to give athletes good advice. We still see a great agreement, 62% strongly agree, but you start to see that there is some disagreement on that. 58% strongly agreed and 21% somewhat agreed that they would like more training on health and fitness topics. And this is really important as we think about some strategies and training materials that we might want to develop in the future. And then finally, this one is really critical to thinking about what we can do. Coaches mostly agreed that they do have some time to promote health and fitness at practice. And just before we switch to the next slide, in general, again, we asked the first 4 to all groups of the study, and they all had pretty solid agreement on those attitudes. So it's really great to know that most people that were taking this survey did agree about the importance of health and fitness. Let's move to the next slide. So a couple of other things that we found from this survey, nearly 90% of all the coaches who participated in the survey said that health and fitness were being promoted at their Special Olympics sports practice, which is really exciting. We know that there was high frequency of promotion, and it ranged from once in a sports season to weekly or at every practice. In fact, about 70% of our coaches reported that they were promoting health and fitness weekly. The duration of the time that was spent on those health and fitness promotion activities ranged from about 5 minutes to 30 minutes, with most coaches reporting that they were spending 5 to 15 minutes on those health and fitness topics. And then another important finding was that our sport coaches were reporting that they were really leading those conversations around health and fitness. Nearly 90% of them were. However, they were also saying that athlete leaders and sometimes health and fitness professionals were involved in leading those conversations and activities around health and fitness. So that's a really critical thing when we're thinking about who are the leaders in this. Generally speaking, I think it's actually on the next slide. Let's move to the next slide. Generally speaking, there's many ways that our coaches are leading health and fitness work. One is that they're having discussions. You can see that's a very, very big part of what they're doing here on this slide. I'm sorry, it's a lot smaller than I thought it was. And then many of our coaches are leading our athletes in different types of exercise, be it warm up, cool down, sports conditioning, those kind of components. What was less frequently mentioned from our coaches and across the board was that teams are receiving, in some instances, things like tip sheets or trackers or things like that, or they're having activities that are being done to, for example, talk about, nutrition. So those were less frequently mentioned, but in some of the details later on, we did hear that those things were wanted from our athletes. Go ahead and move to the next slide. And then this is just a slide based on the top 5 kind of topics that are being promoted at practice. You can see here that exercise, hydration, and nutrition are kind of the top leading, most frequently discussed or most frequently implemented health topics, and that illness prevention and hygiene from our coaches' perspective were also frequently discussed, but to a lesser extent. And this mirrors the data that we got from our athletes, coaches, or athletes, caregivers, and program staff as well. In every case, exercise, hydration, and nutrition were the most frequently mentioned topics that were discussed. In some of the other stakeholder groups, we did also see mental health rising up as a frequently discussed topic. Please move on to the next slide. And it's also important to note that nearly 70% of the coaches agreed that their health and fitness promotion efforts were helping our athletes to change their health or fitness. Now, what we don't have is a lot of data showing us here's what they're doing at practice and here are the results. But we did ask a follow-up open-ended question to our coaches. How do they know that health is being changed? And we heard from them that athletes are losing weight, they're changing their behaviors. For example, they're, eating healthier when the coach sees them. They're improving their sports performance. They have fewer injuries. They're improving their speed or stamina on the field at practice. And then, many of them also reported that their athletes seem to be having more confidence. So these are not necessarily true outcomes, but things that our coaches are noticing. Move on to the next slide, please. And so these are just some barriers that our coaches have told us are happening as to why maybe they're having a harder time promoting health and fitness as much as they'd like to. And so you can see on this slide, and again, apologies for the wording being a little bit small, but you can see that the major barrier was lack of time. So I think that our coaches probably want to be discussing health and fitness more, but they're limited on the time that they have at practice. And interestingly enough, the smallest barrier for them on this figure is lack of interest. So we think that, maybe that means that they are actually very interested. That's not the challenge, but really that they maybe lack a little bit of the time they'd like. Okay, and then let's move to the next slide and we'll go through the focus groups. So some key themes that we have here, I'll just as a reminder, these were about 15 focus groups. I know I have the number and I gave it to you earlier, and that we talked to. And this one, I'm less focused on the coach's perspective, and I am really thinking about the entire perspective when I'm giving you these key themes. We have a little bit more of analysis to do with this data, but I wanted to give you some of the key themes that are really presenting themselves so far. So the first one is that there was a really important confirmation of the health and fitness topics that we just mentioned in the survey results. Exercise, nutrition, hydration were priority number 1, 2, and 3. And then mental health, illness prevention actually was it brought up, but said that it was decreasing now that COVID is a little less problematic. And then also hygiene. Those topics were brought up across all focus groups. Programming generally consisted of in practice and out of practice components. So even though we asked specifically about what's happening at sports practice, our coaches, athletes, caregivers, program staff would talk about maybe, warm-ups, cool downs, maybe some health lessons that they were giving at practice. And then they'd kind of transition to talking about, well, also our program does these virtual competitions for fitness, or we do, workouts, or we have this outside experience as well. So it was interesting to see how those meshed together and how they were really seen as one element. Another thing that was important is that across all of those areas, evaluation of outcomes, how does this change your health, was really important by all of the different stakeholder groups, but it was also seen as a complex element. So how can we measure that? So we will be thinking over the next couple of months as to how we can help our programs and especially our coaches to measure that. Another thing that was important was that our groups told us that in addition to thinking about what's happening at sports practice, we also need to be thinking about what's happening at competitions. Are we serving healthy foods? What's happening at our schools where many of our Special Olympics programming is located? Can we make sure that our teachers are also educated, even the ones that are not coaches? Can we work with our families to make sure they're promoting the same messages that are happening at practice? And finally, when we have partnerships, can we use those to expand our health initiatives? And then the last really main key theme here is that there was a lot of emphasis on the importance of these three key leaders. And of course, number one was coaches. Coaches were seen as this gatekeeper for practice. They are the ones that are thinking through what's going to be done that day, whereas our athlete leaders and fitness professionals can play a role in leading this health promotion piece, but they have to be on the same page as our coaches. Let's move to the next slide. And so just a few additional key themes. Here were some resources that these key stakeholders said that they would like to see. Curricular or lesson plans, things that can be taught. And so I just have a couple pictures of things that we already have here. You can see that to the right of your slide. Some guidelines on what should we be doing at a sports practice to help our athletes be healthy and fitness? Coaches training resources. So I'll get into this in a moment, but we do have some of those available. An app. So could technology support what our coaches are doing? Support with partnerships. I mentioned that a moment ago at the last slide, but how can we better utilize our partnerships? Nutrition resources. Specifically, this was mentioned. I think that there was some understanding of some of the exercise related resources and materials that Special Olympics offers, but this was an area that was specifically brought up. Incentives. How can we get our athletes to really want to do this at home, for example? And then improve data collection systems, which really goes back to that outcomes element. Next slide, please. And so I just wanted to give you a quote from those focus groups that really illustrates, how our coaches are thinking. And so the quote here is, I think our role is to be aware of health and fitness principles, aware of our athletes' limitations and things that they are interested in so that we can go further. If they do ask us about health or nutrition, I think it's our job to know these things, or at least know where to find the answers to their question, to be able to help them to be more healthy and more fit. Because in the end, I'd rather they be a better person, a better, healthier person than win a gold medal any day. And so I really think from all of the coaches and coaches that I talked to and what we saw in the survey, this really represents what many coaches are thinking, which is really great. Let's move to the next slide. And this is really now translating what we're thinking, what this evaluation meant to what you can do as a coach. So what can you do? The first step is really being a role model to your athletes. Many of you already are. In the health and fitness sense, what this means is, when you are with your athletes, you can see here, there's a coach running with their athletes. Maybe trying to be active on the field when your athletes are being active. When you eat with your athletes, are you choosing healthy foods? When you are drinking, are you promoting hydration and then also drinking water to show that that's important to you as well? So we talked with a lot of members, and they felt the same. You can see here that a program staff felt that modeling is really key. It says it does wonders, right? So that's great. And then another thing that you can do is, even if you feel like you have limited knowledge on health and fitness yourself, get involved with your Special Olympics program and find out what types of programming is happening. So maybe they have in-person activities or virtual components, and promote those activities at practice and try and get your athletes involved that way. So those are a few first steps. Go ahead and move to the next slide. And then a couple of our athletes really pushed for things that they wanted to see at practice. So here are some other things that you can do. Warm-ups and cool downs, they really all focused on, the importance of getting a good solid warm-up and cool down. So if you aren't aware or really have limited knowledge, we have a couple of resources that you can utilize to make sure that you're offering really good solid warm-ups and cool downs. They also really wanted to see healthy food choices and hear about those. So could you provide some tip sheets based off of either some Special Olympics materials or maybe even your national guidelines on what some healthy food choices could be? And when you eat as a team, make sure that you're selecting healthy food options. The next one is they want to have resources and activities to teach those health concepts. They felt the discussion was helpful, but that many of them learn through like visual demonstrations of things or hands-on activities. And so, we will work to develop some of those resources, but we do have a couple of really good resources that you can tap into right now. And then finally, they really did discuss things like goal setting and tracking progress. And this goes back to kind of that outcomes discussion. So we do have a couple of resources that help you to track fitness and health. And so maybe using some of those would be helpful as you help your athletes progress through health and fitness. Next slide, please. And this is just kind of what I was mentioning earlier. The coaches really are the gatekeeper to practice. But the really key thing is here, you don't have to do this yourself. So if you have a really strong athlete leader, or if you know of a health and fitness professional, you can recruit them to kind of do this for you. You see here a picture of an athlete leader who is training a fellow athlete on our Fit 5 material. Next slide, please. And then just wanted to share one of the other elements that we learned is that we have a couple of resources that we found that we believe are beneficial, and that through discussion, we hear are not being quite as promoted as we would like them to be. So this is really inhibiting our coaches because these are the things that you asked for. So here is an online training, what we have through our learning management portal. We also have some athlete resources. These are things that you can use with our athletes. There's Fit 5 and then our new High 5 for Fitness, which is more for our youth athletes. We have a couple of different exercise resources, so you can use those as you're building out some conditioning. We have a lot of different resources for our coaches, including things like tip sheets. And this here is a way to kind of build out an active practice. And then we have a fitness assessment guide. You can use this as a way to track some of these outcomes. And finally, we're updating this more and more, but we have some of the sport guides that have specific fitness information on it around like sports conditioning and injury prevention. And then I'd be remiss, please next slide, if we didn't talk about some key insights for Special Olympics. So what we are taking away is that many health promotion activities are already taking place in Special Olympics practices, which is amazing, and we're very excited to hear that. We are learning that our Special Olympics athletes, coaches, caregivers, and program leaders would like more guidance on the structure, training, how to measure progress, resources for our athletes. And so we will build out more of a strategy and plan for that in the coming months. And then finally, another thing that we learned, as I mentioned earlier, is that we need to do a better job communicating some of the tools that our coaches have available for health and fitness. And I think that's it for me. Thank you so much, everybody. I can put my email in the chat if anybody has any follow-up questions. And other than that, I'm really happy to be here, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Monica. That was very interesting. Now, our second speaker is Tom Norton. Tom has been involved with Special Olympics for over 30 years, first with the law enforcement torch run, and then as a coach in the athletics and other sports, such as speed skating. Tom has been a member for 14 years, Special Olympics regional and provincial teams, and 5 Special Olympics national teams. He lives by his motto, helping you help yourself, an empowerment for all those involved in Special Olympics. As a lifelong learner and mentor for coaches and volunteers, he provides constant support to all programs in aid of their personal development. Welcome, Tom.
Hey, good morning. I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Gilmour. And Monica, for all that you've done this morning, this tremendous amount of information that you've provided. And I'm going to piggyback off a little bit of that. So what we're going to talk about is fitness through sport performance. And I really need to also recognize when I was looking in the chat that obviously we've got coaches from right around the world. And when you see somebody pop up on the list, Alana from Halifax, Nova Scotia, on the East Coast, and here I am. My name's Tom Norton. I'm coming to you here from the beautiful West Coast of Canada here in British Columbia, Abbotsford, British Columbia. And as Gilmour said, not only am I a longtime coach, both in athletics and multi-sport, probably for more than 40 years, but a coach in our provincial athletics club system. Most importantly, and very proudly, I'm one of our 2 parents here, like my wife, Donna Billis, who is also a head coach for speed skating. We're a parent of a very accomplished Special Olympics athlete, our daughter, Paige, and she was born with Down syndrome. Just celebrated her 29th birthday. We're hearing about her 30th birthday next year already. So I'm happy to take some questions along the way. Make sure that you take advantage of the chat, and we'll follow along there and see if we can do our best to answer them. And again, I'd like to thank Special Olympics for this is a fantastic opportunity to reach out to you as coaches who share the same passion for sport and advocacy for individuals living with an intellectual disability as I do, into our illustrious athlete session leader, Gilmour. So thank you. Fitness through sport performance. Now, what does that mean? What does it mean to you, most importantly? Definition that we've come across through Special Olympics is the optimal health and performance through adequate physical activity, nutrition, and hydration. All of our programs focus on these areas, and the themes are present in all the initiatives. It equips coaches and athletes with the right health education and tips to optimize their health, to improve their activities of daily living, and experiencing a healthy lifestyle and perform at their very best on the field of play. And a lot of the benefits we heard from Monica already, benefits of fitness are all encompassing, improving sport performance, of course, that's our topic. And by allowing athletes to increase their endurance, what I like to call capacity for work, their speed, agility, balance, coordination, flexibility, strength, and the ability to generate power in their sport groups. Other benefits, just a couple here I'll touch on. Reducing the risk of injury and improved recovery after practice, training, and games, and overall health and well-being. One of the most important, of course, I think that we recognize through the health aspect is decreasing the risk of illness and chronic disease like heart disease, having a healthy body composition, improving their self-confidence, and the activities of daily living. Promoting inclusion and integration is extremely important. So take your time when you get a chance. I'm really looking forward to see if you could come up with some of those examples for yourself. And then we'll just move on through to our fitness through sport performance. And thank you very much, whoever's working in the back, that's Jeff. Here's a quote for you. An athlete is an athlete is an athlete in an athlete-centered coach-supported program. And so then I'm going to ask you, what does your success look like? So in terms of an athlete is an athlete is an athlete, that's a quotation that comes from a dear friend of mine who's an Olympic athletics coach. It means we train and we prepare our Special Olympics athletes the same as you would any other athlete, with the additional task of managing various adaptations to address their needs either cognitively in scope and sequence or physically to capitalize on strengths with an athlete-centered, coach-supported focus to the program. And the result is athletes need to work hard to develop their skills. And again, like from my friend's quote, as a former teammate and competitor, it's very, very important to remember that the preparation should really look no different than any others, with the exception of those adaptations. So let me ask you, what does your success look like? Just pressing really pause here for a second and give you a chance to think, and we'll see some of these come back on the chat, hopefully. So let's say, for example, what does your success look like? Is it medals? Perhaps, yeah, podium finishes. Yeah, that can be part of it. Personal best performances, yes, most importantly. And in my view, improved activities of daily living and building confidence to be independent above and all is one of the most important ones of those aspects that I feel creates a successful environment. So just as an example, your personal best performance is very importantly, yes, but I also have to think about the background on a quote here that I'm going to offer to you, and this is from Billy Graham, in terms of the impact that a coach might have. Now, a coach will impact more young people in a year than the average person does in a lifetime. And I'll say that again. A coach will impact more people in a year than the average person does in a lifetime. And if you consider the number of years that you've all been coaching, that equates to many, many lifetimes. Planning. Our next slide, please. Planning is critical. For coaches, building your training protocol on the 5-step program in this continuum, executing your plan, gathering feedback, adjusting your protocol based on your feedback. And then again, very importantly, as a coach, be patient. Planning what you intend to do for your training sessions is mission critical. And how you do it is totally up to you. You can use a Post-it note on a clipboard. You can adjust your calendar on your wall. You can use any number of computer programs. And I'm going to give you an example. I said, building those components into your plan will ensure that you're building in the critical success factors, just like we mentioned in the definition of fitness through sport. Adequate physical activity, nutrition, and hydration. When I mentioned the feedback loop, asking a simple question along the way, before, during, and after, gives you tremendous insight in how your athletes are doing and whether or not your plan for this session is hitting its mark. And one of my favorites, at the wrap up of a session that we might do for training, is I'll ask this: on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the easiest, 10 being the hardest, how do you rank today's sessions? And I get all kinds of answers depending on the time of the year and the stages we're at in our programs. As in athletics being my primary sport, with an annual planning phase, you've got general preparation, specific preparation, pre-competition. I'm just checking the chat here in my time. Competition, and at the end of the session, transition towards the end of the year. So that's where I am flexible and very nimble, and I make adjustments accordingly to meet the needs of my athletes. But most of all, be patient. A coach should do their very best to avoid being rushed and doing too much too soon, or too complicated for that matter, because what that does is it puts athletes at risk of illness and injury. And the long-term athlete development model, or LTAD, is one of the keys to the successes of your athletes, doing the right thing and at the right time. Critical success factors. So we'll move on to the next slide. Thank you. Know your audience. Know your audience. Coaching is as much an art as it is a science and performance art, and you want to generate the enthusiasm and demonstrate your passion for sport. As Monica mentioned, that how do we encourage those that are coaching and athletes that are taking part to get hooked on the sport? And then you identify the base elements of your technical models in order to systematically coach each element and plan accordingly. So you get to know your audience. Not only what motivates your athletes, but your supporters, family, friends, caregivers who will support your athletes when they head home. Their support could turn your training session into a much needed lifestyle change. More daily activity care in preparing meals. That's just another example of what happens when you head home. Getting adequate hydration throughout the day, and that's just a few of those examples. So use sports science to help you in your decision making, keeping in mind that's how you deliver your message. How you deliver your message, your passion for your sport, generating enthusiasm will fire up your audience to do their best each and every training session. Associate coaches as well. We got to think and remind ourselves about those grown-ups. If your coaches are fired up from the time they arrive to the time they head home with smiles, then you've earned that gold medal performance already. That's the performance art. The sport technical models are the deep dive into your sport event base. And those base elements allow you to craft your coaching progression plans. Planning is very, very important. It's like how to perform a forehand swing of a tennis racket or the swing of a baseball bat to hit a ball. And the aim of those technical preparations is to create and improve those sport skills. So the sport technical model, I'll just give you a little bit of an example. I'll kind of walk you through one for swimming. Picture this for all you swimming coaches. Your feet and your legs kick alternatively. Your knees are under the water, slightly bent. Your toes just touch the surface of the water. Your elbow is slightly bent, and the little fingers, little ones right here, enter the water first after the arm passes over. So it's the sport technical model, the big stretch up forward and comes back in a cyclical or cyclical action. And the elbows are bent very slightly, and it passes through the thigh, below the water, straight up to repeat that action. So you as a coach being able to describe how that happens is going to give you tremendous amount of success in providing some direction to your athletes and other coaches on how to manage their sport-specific aspects. Planning. Again, back in planning. Building in your success. A successful model. Critical success factors. Knowing your audience. Again, very important. You need to know what makes them tick. Key performance indicators. Loading. What energy systems am I training? And your yearly or annual planning from the micro to the macro. So critical success factors, let's go back to that definition of fitness through sport and use that framework to incorporate those elements into your planning. Know your audience. Now, what motivates your athletes to perform at their best? What drives them to succeed? As coaches, what drives you to succeed? Is it results on the scoreboard, personal record performances, having fun with friends, and the social aspect and the emotional side of sport, which is incredibly important for most, if not all, athletes. And just ask, you look and listen, because each athlete is unique in their own way. Key performance indicators, measurable goals and objectives are incorporated. They're incorporated when you're developing your plan. And these indicators are also a method of feedback on the progress, and the regular assessments built into your sports schedule, like pre, mid, and post-season, offer valuable insight. How a drill is performed, the time that you spent on task, distance traveled, height, heart rate recovery. We looked at a lot of factors that Monica was mentioning on health. In athletics, aside from competition, coach can build race simulations or time trials into the training program to assess progress. And you create a race-ready environment so that athletes can experience the competition environment as an assessment tool before the real racing begins. And that helps to alleviate stress and anxiety, and you practice under those competition conditions. Now, and we'll talk about loading just for a second here. By that, I mean manipulating the training variables like volume, time on task, and intensity to allow for maximum physical adaptation, which is the purpose behind training, getting the body to get to its optimal performance state. I would be remiss if I didn't mention rest and recovery. Two of the most important variables, mission critical for getting enough rest between training sessions as a critical success factor. Now, you can't catch up on rest the day of a competition, so building it into your plan systematically is key. Adding in what energy systems you're training. Aerobic, we all know about that. It's typically a lower intensity using oxygen. We've got the anaerobic, which is a higher intensity with or without oxygen. It's when athletes are really breathing hard and working. And into the lactic system, once the energy stores are depleted. These three very important systems of energy use in the body. how do I incorporate that into the larger vision of the annual plan? You break them down into small components, micro and macro cycles. As just one example, a 1-hour training session added to a second sport-specific session in 1 week is just a good example of a microcycle. Adding 4, 5, or 6 of those weeks together gives you a mesocycle. And as you vary the volume and intensity, it's a good example of a macrocycle overall the entire year. It fits into an annual plan where you've incorporated your season or yearly goals and objectives. Next slide, we'll move into a little good example here of a micro, meso, and macrocycle. Now in the example here over on the screen, you'll see it's a practice plan, pretty straightforward. I'd like to consider these all as being relevant and reliable, repeatable, recognizable, lots of R's there so that you can remember, building in the base elements of the technical model pattern. So you've got who it is that you have on your team, who are your athletes, and periodization is the foundation of that annual planning. It's how you organize the training year into phases where each phase has its specific aims for the athlete's development along the LTAD, the long-term athlete development model. The macrocycle is the larger picture, defining that available preparation time up to a major competition, usually a year. A microcycle, it's a shorter training period, 7 to 10 days perhaps, includes more detailed information on the loading, as I spoke about before, your volume, intensity, frequency, duration, sequencing of the training sessions within that 7 to 10 days. But the emphasis on the elements of the sport technical model for problem solving and improving sport skills. It's relevant to athletes. It's reliable in that sessions are consistent with the planning and they can be replicated at a later date as part of your assessment process. Again, you're using the building blocks of the sport technical model to enhance your skill building. And the example in the illustration, just one training session that offers to cover off main objective. Who are your athletes? How much time do you have? What equipment do you need? What the warm-up consists of? As Monica mentioned, many coaches are looking for examples. There's lots of resources around warming up and training, but including the technical and tactical elements. And one example might be a 100-meter hurdler in track and field athletics, preparing for a national championship, or a shot putter prepping for their qualifying competition of the year. And then you build that into your plan on the creative side, because that one single training session is where your creativity comes in. The annual plan, we'll move to the next slide. This is that record where you want to be. Where do you want to be with your athletes in a year's time? And even more broadly, on a longer, greater scale, the Olympic quadrennial, the 4-year process. We all know that in Special Olympics, we have World Summer Games and we also have World Winter Games, and that follows very similarly the Olympic 4-year cycle. It could be as simple as a notebook. I'm going to just show you. You can probably see this, or a clipboard. And I've got my clipboard, my Post-it note, and I turn that into my notes later on to keep track of what I'm doing. But it's about the planning, keeping that record. So periodization being the foundation of that annual planning, keeping a record. It's organizing your training year into those phases. And the long-term athlete development framework underpinning the developing of those physical literacy components, physical fitness, and the competitive ability using that step-by-step approach. On our next slide, I just touch base a little bit on what I like to call our signature training sessions. And here's just some examples here where you factor in speed mechanics, multi-sport, a collaborative approach, where you're adding in, as we all know, the components of your training session to make it successful. Speed, agility, power, strength. Then you're going to see in quotations, there's a couple of words there. Dynaflex, Canucks, Titan training, ninja tests, 10 by 10. The agility, power, and the capacity-focused obstacle courses that you can use on any type of training. Now, when you look in the image there, we've got a group of athletes training on the track here, and just to the right, you'll see a figure all in a dark looking uniform. Well, in fact, that is a police constable from the Abbotsford Police Department, who is also one of our law enforcement Tour Trent champions, coming out for a training session. Adding those little elements into your training builds the enthusiasm and makes things is extremely exciting, not just for you, but for all your coaches. And quotes of the day are part of those signature types training sessions where you dial in your programs and you give special training sessions their own name, like I mentioned here. But as you add in those little elements into each of your training sessions, as an example, 5 minutes of each of these elements, balance, coordination, agility, it adds up exponentially over time. 5 minutes of core training or balance, coordination into each practice, once a week, twice, 3 times, 5 times a week. And in some cases, you may have athletes training 5, 6 times a week, and sometimes twice a day for that matter. Whether the program is 8 to 12 weeks long or an annual plan that takes you 48 weeks of the year, by adding the 5 minutes of those training aspects into each of those programs every day, before you know it, you've got hours and hours of accumulated training time over the course of your program, sometimes more than 2 hours per month, and the results will speak for themselves over the course of the program. You see in my list there, I've got Dynaflex, well, that how we describe 5 dynamic warm-up exercises that we use. It's simple big muscle groups down to the more finite muscle activation activities that takes maybe 15 to 20 minutes in a training session, but no more than 10 to 15 minutes before a competition. And that way your body's fully warmed up for your optimal performance. I call it the next one, just as an example, the Canucks, Vancouver Canucks. Anyone watches NHL hockey here in British Columbia, we've got the Vancouver Canucks NHL hockey team. A well choreographed independent training session where athletes build in their own independence is remarkable, where the team will come onto the ice and continuous movement for 59 minutes and 59 seconds from warm up to cool down. And you can use that in almost any setting. Most importantly, one of the most fun ones I have is adding in a ninja test. It's one of my faves, where during a session, I'll add in a particular challenging activity that tests different skill sets. A stork stance for balance, perhaps, or a wall sit for time. Including that into a particular session tells you that all of your athletes will be good at something and will always succeed. We always leave training sessions with athletes feeling at their very, very best. Now, building on our success, on our next slide here, you'll see on the screen, we build in challenges. Above all, we make it fun, challenging for coaches and athletes alike by combining the aspects of your training objectives. And an obstacle course or station training doesn't take up much space. It can be done inside or out. And we're going to give it a try here. There's a short video that I think Jeff might be able to play. And let's see if that works.
Got a lot of work here going on in Club Fit. Club Fitters! We got the battle ropes in this today. We got
creativity is yours. Like that training session I mentioned, the Canucks workout, 59 minutes, 59 seconds of movement, and I've been told on a scale of 1 to 10, this is often 9 to 10 with a lot of laughs. On our last couple of slides here, building success, building in fun. Most importantly, coaches and athletes. Do you want to build an enthusiasm, make it fun and challenging for coaches and athletes alike? And a good old-fashioned tug-of-war is a good example, brings out the competitive spirit, challenges all of the physical abilities of your athletes, big or small, asking speed, strength, endurance, and power. We're going to have a look at a short little video here as well, what we've done at one of our track and field sessions.
This one is for all the marbles. Stand by. Stand by. Pull. Woo! Crazy. Come on, come on. Whoa!
That is definitely one of my more favorite activities. So on our last slide here, let's continue to think about an athlete is an athlete, And I mentioned our daughter, Paige Norton. This is a picture of her. I'm very proud to be able to put that picture up. She's a short track speed skater, among other pursuits. Great coaches fuel great athletes. We treat each and every athlete like the great individuals they are, and they'll succeed in ways that you never imagined, sport and in life. So building better athletes, good citizens, and ambassadors for sport and in life is what we do here as coaches. So thank you very much. I really appreciate everybody taking part in our session here.
Thank you, Tom. That was super, super interesting. Thank you, Monica and Tom. Very interesting presentation and important points to follow. This is the time where we focus on the question and answer you posted in the chat. First of all, I would like to thank you all for your participation. I can see a couple of interesting questions. This one's for you, Monica. I have a limited time with my athletes at practice. Are there any other particular way I can help to educate them about good nutrition and hydration practices and the benefits of being active away from our organized training?
Yeah, I think as a first step, is really just trying to make sure that you are being a good role model, as I mentioned in the presentation. So that's step number one, and you don't need any extra time in order to do those elements. So when you are, having those opportunities to have a snack with your team, maybe it's before a competition or something like that, you can show them that you're eating healthy foods, you're encouraging them to do the same, and maybe you add in a little bit of an explanation why. We have a couple of really great resources and Special Olympics, and we are going to share the links. And some of those things are things that you could very easily take just one page, for example, of the Fit 5 or the High 5 or some additional materials, and try and explain to those, to the athletes, that page, for example, at practice that week, and maybe even task them with some activities. Fit 5 and High 5 have some really great goals that they can work on at home. And so, for example, if you're talking about, I really want everybody to try and stay active outside of practice, one of the goals of Fit 5 is to try and be active 5 days a week. And so you can have them check that off and try and practice doing that at home and report back to you how they're doing. There's tracking material. Similarly with High 5, that's our version for youth. We have similar types of trackers that can go along with that. So those kind of things take very little time to explain at the end of practice, but having that sort of, little thing that you want them to try that week can really help them to extend what they're doing throughout the week and between the times that they meet with you.
Thank you. This one's for you, Tom. You have given us some great details about planning. How can I influence fitness and health information like hydration and nutrition into my training sessions with my athletes?
Excellent question. And again, we come back to planning, and it's about incorporating the small little elements into every one of your sessions where you develop your model. And I'll give you a good example. As when athletes arrive to a practice, the first thing that I like to do, and I call it the form police. So the first thing that athletes know is we're going to be checking for equipment. Do you have your water bottle with you? And I will ask this question: what do you have in your water bottle? And sometimes you get puzzled looks. I said, well, water, of course. I said, well, how long has the water been in your water bottle? Is it fresh? So the verbal cues along the way for athletes and coaches to remind themselves is, oh yeah, every time I pick up my water bottle, I'd like it to be full. I'd like it to be fresh. And by the time that I get through half of it, I'm going to go and top it up again. So incorporating the small little elements on a regular basis into your model provides the consistent cues, no different than, when you show up to a practice, are your shoelaces tied up? You said, well, if they're not tied up, why do I have to have my shoelaces tied up? Well, if you trip and fall, you're going to be injured. So hydration, nutrition, all critically important. Ask a simple question. What did you have for breakfast this morning? And then you start your practice or your training session with a short little 2 to 3 or maybe even 4 minute meeting just to get all your athletes and your coaches in tune with what you want to do for the day and explain your objectives before you even start.
Thank you, Tom. Our next topic is about the iCoach Kids Conference. The 6th International iCoach Kids Conference will take place on the 18th and 19th of November 2022 in Frankfurt, Germany. This is a great event and it is being held for the first time and in-person conference since the COVID pandemic. iCoach Kids is a project organized by the International Council for Coaching Excellence. This provides development opportunity and advanced learning for coaching who coach children and young people. Special Olympics and iCoach Kids are collaborating to offer inclusive sports training to youths and offer a number of fantastic resources for coaches to continue learning and improving their coaching knowledge. After seeing of all those fantastic and very useful resources, let's take a minute to see our partners through a short video which acknowledge the hard work done by coaching with the ICK Champions campaign. What a fantastic video. Another partner organization for Special Olympics is the Liverpool John Moores University. They are carrying out a research on Special Olympics coaching. If you are interested in participating in this research, please send an email shown on the screen to Miss Anne Hardwick. We are soon reaching the end of this webinar. But before we conclude, we have another short video from Special Olympics Chairman Dr. Timothy Shriver. Dr. Shriver leads the Special Olympics International Boards of Directors, and together with 6 million Special Olympics athletes in more than 200 countries, promote health, education, and more unified words through the joy of sports.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Shriver, and I'm so honored to be joining you. I wish face-to-face, but only virtually, to celebrate the work of coaches, the importance of this webinar series, and the urgency, I dare say the absolute urgency, of improving our coaching around the world so that we can have the highest quality experience for our athletes and the highest quality capacity to change attitudes for the entire rest of the planet. It all comes down to the power of the athlete-coach relationship. We don't get fitness without coaches. We don't get better nutrition without coaches. We don't get skill development without coaches. We don't get teams without coaches. We don't get confidence without coaches. And maybe most importantly, we don't get the chance to convince people that their gifts are even greater than they dare imagine, unless a coach convinces them of that. I read somewhere that some coaches teach you how to win. Other coaches teach you how to believe in something bigger than winning. Our coaches, the coaches of a half century of Special Olympics athletes, are amongst the greatest testaments to the power of the human spirit to make a difference. It all begins with coaches. So I want to thank the athlete and coach leaders. I want to thank Ruby Lawler from Australia, Kira Byland from Great Britain, Rosalino Chavez from Paraguay, and of course Gilmour Borg from Special Olympics Malta. I've met most of you. I admire all of you. I'm grateful to each and every one of you for placing the power of a coach at the center of the Special Olympics power to change the world.
Thank you, Dr. Shriver. We have now come to an end for the last webinar of the 2022 Coach Webinar Series. Thank you to all the coaches that attended these webinars. Thank you to all those speakers and hosts who participated in these webinars. Thank you again to our partners, Gallagher, for their support for the Special Olympics Coach Webinar Series 2022. Thank you.